So in this segment, we're going to be discussing an article in the Telegraph which asks the question, is Rishi Sunak finally getting Brexit done? So this is a lot of stuff on the Northern Ireland Protocol, a lot of specific stuff. Buckle up, it's a long one, I'll give you that. So the deal, the UK finally giving the EU access to the live data of movement of goods moving between GB and NI, which will let the EU monitor remotely and in real time the flow of goods, was finalised at Lancaster House in London in a cordial atmosphere built in the case of Cleverly and Maros Sefcovic, which are an unlikely duo. On unusual foundations, they are both fans of Yes Minister, a British political source said. They have a very good relationship. Yes Minister, I don't know much about the show. So the live data access is something the UK was meant to sort out from the jump, or as close to it as possible. I've not watched Yes Minister, but it seems to be very popular amongst the older generation. My political comedy came from the show The Revolution Will Be Televised, which I'm still amazed the BBC actually put out. So Britain's proposal is that trusted traders who regularly send goods into Northern Ireland could use a green lane where they are monitored, but there are no checks. Others would have to go through a red lane. The issue is that a trusted trader scheme would in reality take years to build because trust is built over time. For the supermarkets that do not have shops in Ireland, but they do have them in Northern Ireland, it makes sense for them to maybe be fast-tracked into such a scheme. A red lane would be a lane which would face potentially full checks. So allowing the big supermarkets to send their goods unimpeded would account for 80% of the current problems, which would mean shelves were fully stocked and remedy most likely to be noticeable to ordinary people in Northern Ireland, except there are no shelf issues in Northern Ireland from what I've read. They were initially, but that's mostly been resolved, I think. I did not know it was mostly supermarkets that face the majority of checks, which I guess makes sense. Resolving issues for them would be great, but there needs to be more help for small businesses selling directly from GB to NI. But resolving up to 80% of the checks would be great for the people in Northern Ireland who pay less on average for food than people in Great Britain anyways. So great. This is where the live data comes in. It will allow EU officials remote access to the movement of every consignment of goods coming into Northern Ireland. Britain insists it will show that the threat to the single market of goods going south is minuscule, so goods going from Northern Ireland to Ireland. Some EU officials have acknowledged that the protocol has protected the single market to the extent that they're willing to lower the number of checks. The protocol was always written so it could be tweaked in the future. Having the data means that any dodgy or sus loads can be checked, and that would further help to stop any substandard goods getting into the single market. We have already seen the protocol checks stop drugs and other substandard goods going into Northern Ireland and by extension any chance of them getting into the EU single market. EU technical experts examined the computer system, a rare triumph of government for IT, UK IT, and requested 22 changes to improve the scope and speed of the data. One of them was to request better search facilities. Search facilities are important, people. Okay, never skimp on it. When is a green lane not a green lane? When is it an EU express lane? The problem from Britain's point of view is that the EU is still insisting on carrying out some checks in the express lane, but if it's quicker than the other lane, you can call it a fast lane or an express lane. Like it just the semantics of the British government just know no bounds. The issue is the UK wants a green lane, which means goods in that lane won't be checked because we are assuming they will stay in Northern Ireland. But the express lane means goods will still face significantly less checks than they would under the current system. A British source said, quote, they can call them express lanes as long as they don't contain checks. What is the point of them if they include checks? When is a green lane not a green lane when it's an amber lane with some checks? They could, of course, call it an orange lane. End quote. So see, this is an issue. The UK markets the deal or this proposal as having a green lane. The issue is those goods will face checks. Unionists and right-wingers will moan about this. Calling it an express lane just makes sense. This is beyond semantics. This is very flippant from UK officials. Like the UK are the ones calling for the green lane, no one else. So if the UK are moaning like the EU won't give us a green lane, it makes no sense. The semantic twisting does not end here. Last month, Britain quietly tabled a statute, so this stuff is kind of funny, an instrument to allow the creation of border posts in all but name, which are needed for trade with the Republic of Ireland, but which could also be used to perform checks on animal and plant material entering Northern Ireland, so-called SPS goods. So there will no doubt, this will no doubt annoy the DUP, but further adds to the UK's newfound willingness to actually adhere to the protocol. We know the infrastructure in Northern Ireland isn't enough to do all the checks, so these new facilities are needed. Anything which smacks of a border in the Irish Sea will be condemned by hardline unionists, so officials in Whitehall are calling them SPS huts instead. EU insiders don't care what they're called as long as bricks are put on top of other bricks. I mean, I hope the civil servants who came up with the phrase SPS huts get a pay rise, because they should really work in marketing. I hope they have enough staff for these SPS huts and policing, because we have seen unions threaten border staff before. From the British perspective, the Commission has changed its tune, admitting that there are practical problems on the ground, but Stowstack, I'm going to say that is, and others are still saying any tweaks must be about how the protocol is implemented rather than rewriting the treaty. British negotiators argue that treaties are tweaked all the time when aspects of them are shown not to work. So this is pretty comical. The British team are saying treaties are tweaked all the time, which is what the EU wanted to do from the start. Perhaps if the EU were given live access to the data quicker, we would have got to a point where less checks are needed. But we won't know that, because the Tories seem to want to be dragged over things they agreed to but won't implement. None of this means there will be a deal. There are still differences on VAT, where Northern Ireland residents have to pay taxes which are not levied elsewhere in the UK, and on state aid, where the Commission believes the UK has helped car manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies at the expense of their European rivals. So state aid is one where it'll end up going to the WTO, World Trade Organization most likely. In fact, the EU are already taking us to the WTO over windmills. So it's probably going to be the case that the further protocol tweaks will be based around checks rather than anything else. With the VAT stuff, I'm sure they can be negotiated. Maybe they're talking about sanitary products that no longer have VAT applied to them in Great Britain, but might do in Northern Ireland. I'm sure this can be negotiated, given that some of those same products in Ireland also do not have VAT on them either. While Britain's argument is that their side concerns are real issues on the ground and the EU's are theoretical risks to the single market that have not yet materialised, Commission officials say their concerns are also practical. So this one's a pretty weird example. They point to the fact that since Brexit, the UK has begun importing oranges from South America, where citrus black spot disease have been found. Britain has no citrus crops to speak of, but Commission officials argue that if an infected orange was taken to Sevilla, for example, it can destroy the entire Spanish crop. And I mean, this is a pretty wild example. For this to happen, someone from Northern Ireland would have to buy these oranges from Great Britain. They would then have to be sold in Spain and then planted or something. Like, I don't know, this one seems odd. I'm sure there's people in the comments that can answer that one better than I can at least. Commission officials dismiss these objections, arguing that they don't hear mention of the European Court of Justice. So I've kind of cut bits out of the article. But, the UK complains about the European Court of Justice. Businesses in Northern Ireland don't care about it. Business in Northern Ireland, don't care about the ECJ. The only thing that they would be concerned about are with costs in this context. They have to buy products from GB, or if they have to buy products from GB, and those costs can be lowered, they'll take it as a win. They also point out that they cannot be seen to water down the role of the ECJ at a time when the EU has grave concerns about democratic governance in Hungary and Poland. This is an argument particularly close to the heart of Stowstack, who is half Polish and half English. But the role of the ECJ is arguably the most critical for satisfying the ERG and the DUP. A senior member of the ERG said, quote, "We do not like what we are hearing about the direction of travel. The Prime Minister should not sign a deal which leaves part of the UK under EU legal jurisdiction. No other country in the world would allow that," end quote. So Labour have offered to vote any legislation that the Tories want to pass to help resolve the issues around the protocol. So that will help in the short term. Longer term, that's a headache for Sunak to sort out, because I can see the ERG threatening to withhold votes. Their whole objection to the ECJ makes no real sense anyways. However, two of the major ministers for Northern Ireland issues are former ERG chairmen, so it should be interesting to see how they play their role. Donaldson, the DUP leader, is also understood to be unhappy, and civil servants feel that if Sunak can secure a deal that the vast majority of people regard as a step forward, the Ulstermen may not back it. Quote, "The DUP have said that even if we get a deal they are content with, they might still want to see it in operation before they agree to it," an insider said, end quote. So, I mean, that's pretty mad. The DUP have 7 tests that will probably never be met unless they're met. They won't return to Stormont, or at least claim to. The issue is that what will they do when the British government tell them the issues, for the most part, around the protocol are sorted? How can they then refuse to take up their place in Stormont? Donaldson is regarded as a pragmatist, but others, including the party's Brexit spokesman Sammy Wilson and Ian Paisley Jr., are hardline ideologues. Donaldson will have to make a decision, a British source said. Can he take the party with him if he backs a deal, or will they get rid of him? He's not trusted by some of them because he used to be an Ulster Unionist, so he used to be in the UUP, and he is not as religious as the other hardliners, end quote. So Jeff is a pragmatist compared to the others, that's scary. I think Sunak has no choice but to keep undermining the DUP, passing legislation they don't like, because I just can't see them going back to Stormont willingly. And, the question is, if Donaldson can convince the rest of the DUP to back a deal, which I don't think he'll be able to, because he set his 7 rules, his 7 standards so high, I don't think he can climb down from it. And this is just sad for the people of Northern Ireland. Cross-community support is important, but what do you do when one side just rage quits? What are the others meant to do at that point? I don't know how to answer that. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.